Life of David Livingston, Part 39. A whole year has thus been spent in feasting slaves on 500 pounds sent by government to me. Like the man who was tempted to despair when he broke the photograph of his wife, I feel inclined to relinquish hope of ever getting help from Zanzibar to finish the little work I have still to do. I wanted men, not slaves, and free men are abundant at Zanzibar, but if the matter is committed to Luda instead of an energetic Arab, with some little superintendence by your dragoman or others, I may wait 20 years, and your slaves feast and fail. That's from Livingston. He said that, or wrote that. I will just add that the second batch of slaves had, like the first, 2 freemen as its leaders, and 1 died from smallpox. The freemen in the first party of slaves were Sharif and Awathe. I enclose also a shameless overcharge in Ludah's bill, $364. David Livingston. This should appear to be a complete justification for Mr. Stanley's energetic animadversions upon the general maladministration of affairs at Zanzibar by the British consulate there. So, as far as related to Dr. Livingston, it should be a source of honest congratulation to every American that a citizen of the United States, representing one of the most widely circulated public journals of the nation, energetically sent forward men, not slaves, and furnished supplies by means of which it may reasonably be expected the explorer may proceed with his great work and accomplishment, the object so dear to his admirable ambition. Dr. Livingston's next dispatch is to Earl Granville from Ujiji, December 18, 1871. It's almost wholly of an official nature, containing his theory, already herein set forth, of the watershed of the Nile, but contains a photograph relating the arrival of the Herald expedition, which is well worthy of quotation. A vague rumor reached Ujiji in the beginning of the last month that an Englishman had come from Unyanyambembe with boats, horses, men, and goods in abundance. It was in vain to conjecture who this could be, and my eager inquiries were met by answers so contradictory that I began to doubt if any stranger had come at all. But one day, I cannot say which, for I was 3 weeks too fast in my reckoning, my man Sutzi came dashing up with great excitement and gasped out, "An Englishman is coming. See him." And off he ran to meet him. The American flag at the head of the caravan told me the nationality of the stranger. It was Mr. Henry Stanley. The traveling correspondent of the New York Herald, sent by the son of the editor, James Gordon Bennett, Jr., at the expense of £5,000 to obtain correct information about me and my living, and if dead, to bring home my bones. And the kindness was extreme, and made my whole family thrill with excitement and gratitude. I had been left nearly destitute by the moral idiot Sharif, selling off my goods for slaves and ivory for himself. My condition was sufficiently forlorn, for I had but a few articles of barter left of what I had taken the precaution to leave here in case of extreme need. The strange news Mr. Stanley had to tell to one for years out of communication with the world was quite reviving. Appetite returned, and in a week I began to feel strong, having men and goods and information that search for an outlet of the Tanganyika was desired by Sir Roderick Murchison, who went for a month's cruise down the northern end. This was a pleasure trip compared to the weary trampling of all the rest of my work, but an overflow we did not find. The opening paragraph of the dispatch from which this is taken is so finely characteristic that it should not be omitted. Dr. Livingston began his letter to Lord Clarendon's successor in this beautifully courteous manner. My lord, the dispatch of Lord Clarendon, dated May 31st, 1870, came to this place on 13th ult, and its very kindly tone and sympathy afforded me a world of encouragement. Your lordship will excuse me in saying that with my gratitude there mingled sincere sorrow that the personal friend who signed it was no more. At last, the last of these dispatches of the explorer was the longest and perhaps the most worthy of his fame. Addressed to Earl Granville, it was a clear, full statement of the prevalence of the African slave trade and the terrible denunciation of it, together with a proposition which, he says, I have very much at heart, the possibility of encouraging the native Christians of English settlements on the west coast of Africa to remove and by voluntary emigration to a healthy spot on this side of the continent. There are in Zanzibar a considerable number of British subjects from India called Banayans. They are, like all British subjects, prohibited from engaging in the slave trade, but shrewdly managing to throw the responsibility upon the Arabs. They are in fact responsible for the slave trade of Zanzibar and all the horrible slaving of Africa. The Manyema cannibals, says Dr. Livingston in the dispatch to Earl Granville, among whom I spent nearly 2 years, are innocents compared with our protected Banayan fellow subjects. By their Arab agents, they compass the destruction of more human lives in 1 year than the Manyema do for their flesh pots in 10. Slaves are not bought, he says in another place, in the countries to which the Banayan agents proceed. Indeed, it is a mistake to call the system of Ujiji slave trade at all. The captives are not traded for, but murdered for, and the gangs which are dragged coastwise are usually not slaves, but captive free people. To eradicate this fearful wrong, the practical remedy proposed by the explorer in his letter to Earl Granville is encouragement by the British government to the voluntary emigration of native Christians from the Christian settlements of West Coast to the East Coast. In reply to the argument of the unhealthfulness of this proportion of Africa, he says that the fevers are bad enough indeed, but that very much more of the disease prevailing is due to intemperance and gross licentiousness than fever. The whole dispatch is a demonstration of Dr. Livingston's earnest piety, humanity, and practical sagacity. I don't know. Maybe like being a sage. I don't know. If there are some passages in which show that his Highland blood is up, they may be attributed to a fiery hatred of injustice. These quotations from Dr. Livingston's letters of the important period of his life will be apparently concluded with his letter of thanks to the editor of the Herald. James Gordon Bennett, Esquire, Jr. My dear sir, it is in general somewhat difficult to write to one we have never seen. It feels so much like addressing an abstract idea, but the presence of young representative Mr. H.M. Stanley is in this distant region takes away the strangeness I should otherwise have felt, and in writing to you, thank you for the extreme kindness that prompted you to send him. I feel quite at home. If I explain the forlorn condition in which he found me, you will easily perceive that I have good reason to use very strong expressions of gratitude. I came to Ujiji off the tramp of between 400-500 miles beneath the blazing vertical sun, having been baffled, worried, defeated, and forced to return when almost in sight of the end of the geographical part of this mission by a number of half-caste Muslim slaves sent to me from Zanzibar instead of men. The sore heat made still sore the woeful sights I had seen of men's inhumanity to man, reached and told on the bodily frame of depressed in beyond measure. I thought that I was dying on my feet, and not too much to say that almost every step of the weary sultry was in pain, and I reached Ujiji a mere ruckle of bones. There I found that some 500 pounds sterling worth of goods which I had ordered from Zanzibar had unconscionably been entrusted to a drunken half-caste Muslim trader who, after squandering them for 16 months on the way to Ujiji, finished up by selling off all that remained of slaves, for slaves, and ivory for himself. He had divined on the Quran and found that I was dead. Oh, so he did fortune telling with the Quran or something to find out that Livingston was dead, which he wasn't. He also had written to Governor of Umbembe that he had sent slaves after me to Manyema, who returned and reported my decease, and begged permission to sell off a few goods that his drunken appetite had spared. He, however, knew perfectly well from men who had seen me that I was alive and waiting for the goods and men. But as for morality, he is evidently an idiot. And there being no law here except that of the dagger or musket, I had to sit down in great weakness, destitute of everything save a few barter clothes and beads, which I had taken the precaution to leave here in case of extreme need. The near prospect of beggary among the Ujijians made me miserable. I could not despair because I had laughed so much at a friend who, on reaching the mouth of the Zambezi, had said that he was tempted to despair on breaking the photograph of his wife. We could have no success after that. After the idea of despair had to me such a strong smack of the ludicrous that it was out of the question. Well, when I had got about the lowest verge, vague rumors of the English visitor reached me. I thought of myself as the man who went down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and neither priest, Levite, nor Samaritan could possibly pass my way. Yet the good Samaritan was close at hand, and one of my people rushed at the top of his speed, and, great excitement, gasped out, "An Englishman coming! See him!" And off I darted to meet him, an American flag, and first ever seen in these parts, and the head of a caravan told me the nationality of the stranger. I am cold and non-demonstrative as we islanders are usually reputed to be, but your kindness made my frame thrill. It was indeed overwhelming, and I said in my soul, "Let the richest blessings descend from the highest onto you and yours." The news of Mr. Stanley had to tell was thrilling. The mighty political changes on the continent, the success of the Atlantic cables, the election of General Grant, the many other topics riveted my attention for days altogether, and had an immediate and beneficial effect on my health. I had been without news from home for years, save what I could glean from the few Saturday reviews and Punch of 1868 that revived, and in a week I began to feel strong again. Mr. Stanley brought a most kind and encouraging dispatch from Lord Clarendon, whose loss I sincerely deplored. At first I have received from the Foreign Office since 1866 the information that the British government had kindly sent £1,000 sterling to my aid. Up to his arrival I was not aware of any pecuniary aid. I came unsalaried, but this want is now happily repaired, and I am anxious that you and all my friends should know that although uncheered by letter, I have stuck to the task which my friend Sir Roderick Murchison set me with John Bullish tendency, believing that all would come right at last. The watershed of Central Africa is over 700 miles in length. The fountains thereon are almost innumerable. That is, it would take a man's lifetime to count them. From the watershed they converge into 4 large rivers, and these again into 2 mighty streams. in the Great Nile Valley, which begins in 10 degrees 12 degrees south latitude. It was long ere light dawned on the ancient problem and gave me a clear idea of the drainage. I had to feel my way in every step of the way and was generally groping in the dark, for who had cared where the waters ran? We drank our fill and let the rest run by. The Portuguese who visited Cazemba asked for slaves and ivory and heard of nothing else. I asked about waters, questioned and cross-questioned, until I was almost afraid of being set down as afflicted by hydrocephalus. Hydrocephalus. My last work, in which I have been greatly hindered from what was of suitable attendance, was following the central line of drainage down through the country of the cannibals called Manyema, or shortly Manyema. This line of drainage has 4 large lakes in it, and the fourth I was near when obliged to turn. It is from 1 to 3 miles broad and never can be reached at any point or at any time of the year. And never can be reached at any point or at any time of the year. 2 western drains, the Lupira or Bartle Frere River, flows into it at Lake Camolondo. Then the great river Lomain flows through Lake Lincoln into it and seems to form a western arm of the Nile on which Petherick traded. Now I know about 600 miles of the watershed, and unfortunately the 700 is the most interesting of the whole, for in it, if I am not mistaken, 4 fountains arise from an earthen mound, and the last of the 4 becomes, at no great distance off, a large river. 2 of these run north to Egypt, Luperia, and Lorraine, and 2 run south into inner Ethiopia as the Liambai and Upper Zambezi, and the Kafnere, but these are but the sources of the Nile mentioned by the Secretary of Minerva. In the city of Sais to Herodotus, I have heard of them so often and at great distances off that I cannot doubt their existence. And in spite of the sore longing and home that seizes me every time I think of my family, I wish to finish up their rediscovery. 500 pounds sterling worth of goods have again unaccountably been entrusted to slaves, and have been over a year on their way. Instead of 4 months, I must go where they lie at your expense, ere I can put the natural completion of my work. And if my disclosures regarding the terrible Ujjayan slavery should lead to the suppression of the East Coast slave trade, I shall regret that as a greater matter by far than the discovery of all the Nile sources together. Now that you have done with domestic slavery forever, lend us your powerful aid towards this great object. This fine country is blighted as with a curse from above, in order that the slavery privileges of the petty Sultan of Zanzibar may not be infringed, and the rights of the Crown of Portugal, which are mythical, should be kept in abeyance till further time, when Africa should be another India, or Portuguese slave traders become another India to Portuguese slave traders. I conclude by again thanking you most cordially for your great generosity, and am gratefully yours, David Livingston. David Livingston's plan for exploration for the future will lead him far southward of Ujiji. He will march southwestward from Unyanyembe, and passing south of Tanganyika Lake, traverse Tanganyika Lake, traverse the country of Kazembe, and by a general circular course again reach the supposed sources of the Nile and finish the work which was before so bravely begun and prosecuted, and so unfortunately begun to imperfect termination by reason of neglect and incapacity of the representatives of the British government at Zanzibar. The end of chapter 15.